Yeah, the story of what we're going to be doing today, and I'm going to put us up on Facebook too. Yeah, it is definitely disappointing and scary, but people have looked at Jeremiah also as an example of, how do you make sense of chaos while it's happening? And I think in many ways he's the prophet that I would like to have met the most, because he is the one who really does help the people, I think, get to the next stage, even though, again, he's kind of negative, but I mean, he's not really. I mean, he's just speaking as he sees it. So yeah, maybe, but people hated him, which is why people don't like people telling them the truth. Really, you can't handle the truth. He's more of that guy. He's more of Jack. Anyway, no, he's not, because he's not making excuses for bad behavior. He's actually calling people account. But let's take a look, because you're going to get hit right away with one of the more graphic images of Jeremiah. Not the most, but one of a typical Jeremiah. So, Judith?
At that time, declares God, the bones of the kings of Judah, of its officers, of the priests, of the prophets, and of the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be taken out of their graves and exposed to the sun, the moon, and all the host of heaven that they loved and served and followed, to which they turned and bowed down. They shall not be gathered for reburial. They shall become dung upon the face of the earth.
Yeah, that's pretty graphic. You can't get much more graphic than that. Yeah, so all the leaders, all those kings and highfalutin people that were kind of got us into this situation in the first place, they're going to be all taken out, and their bodies are going to be left out, and they're not going to be reburied. They're just going to be turned into trash. That's what it says. Now, obviously, this is the ultimate disrespect to do to a kingdom, is to take out their kings and to despoil their graves. This was done. This was typical behavior for one country invaded another country and wanted to send a message that we're obliterating your country. So we're obliterating your country. We'll take away their defense, their ability to have any, pull down the walls, make sure that their armies are defeated and destroyed. And we're going to destroy your history. We're going to destroy your cultural treasures. We're going to destroy your belief in that your ancestors somehow are an honor to you. Look, to talk about Washington, D.C., and to talk about what we do in our country, we're not crazy about necessarily burials, but we do occasionally have tombs. Interestingly, our monuments and memorials in DC are actually not the graves where the people are buried, which is unusual, because usually they were, but ours are not. And so, Washington's buried out in Mount Vernon, and they're not. That's not where they're buried, but you do have those monuments. Needless to say, kind of the understanding if our country ever got invaded or destroyed, that they would destroy those things, right? They would destroy those monuments. The image of the Statue of Liberty being turned into a Nazi statue, which is the man in the high towers, logo, right? These kinds of things are, we've imagined them, right? We've tried to figure out what they're like. But in the ancient world, that also included taking your kings and having them destroyed. It's weird. We believe we have the part of the tomb of King Herod that we discovered at Herodium, where he was buried. And we've found part of his sarcophagus. We don't know where his bones are, his body is, and we don't know who destroyed it. It's very likely that Herod's grave was actually desecrated by Jews who didn't like Herod. We don't know, but desecrating someone's grave was done. And again, I don't know that we'll do that today. I don't think that's on our agenda when we go to war against people, is to desecrate the graves of their leaders. I don't think we've done that in America, but I could be wrong. I don't know that that's been done. I do know that I was reading, interestingly, that when, just like, a few months ago, when Russia invaded Ukraine, they actually stole the bones of one of the Russian leaders who was buried in Ukraine. They actually stole his bones, not out of desecration, I guess out of the opposite, which is, preserving the bones and kind of like keeping and taking them. This literally just happened. When did it happen? October of last year. Some of you have heard of this dude before. Gregor Potemkin. So Russia came in and took the bones, Potemkin's bones, out of Kherson. So weird, but they did. They he was a Russian, and he worked for Catherine the Great. He was kind of her prince, her stooge, and so they took he took his bones. This just happened. So when you talk about graves being robbed or desecrated or whatever, it's not ancient history. That's all I'm telling you. When I didn't know about this, by the way. I was reading an article in the Atlantic about why they did it. And it's so weird. So the way Jeremiah tells us too, by the way, and I don't want to dwell on this too long, but Jeremiah is so brilliant because he doesn't just say they're going to take the bones and turn them into trash. That'd be one thing, right? He actually digs at them and everyone else, because he says that they're going to be left out to the sun, the moon, and the stars, the things that you've been worshiping. That's even more powerful and brilliant, because he doesn't just say they're going to be turned into trash. He says, and they're going to sit under the things that you've been worshiping, because you've been doing it, because they and you have been worshiping like pagans the stars. So they'll be sitting under the stars. It's just such a poetic and powerful way. Again, like, it's one thing if you just said they're going to leave them out and they're not going to be buried, but then he digs back at these people and to his people who say, oh, look, you've been worshiping these things. Isn't that ironic? So, that's why Jeremiah goes that extra step, right? And it's not going to get better. Okay.
And death shall be preferable to life for all that are left of this wicked folk, in all the other places to which I shall banish them, declares God of hosts. Say to them, thus said God, when people fall, do they not get up again? If they turn aside, do they not turn back? Why is this people, Jerusalem, rebellious? With a persistent rebellion, they cling to deceit, they refuse to return. I have listened and heard. They do not speak honestly. No one regrets their own wickedness and says, what have I done? They all persist in their wayward course, like a steed dashing forward in the fray. Even the stork in the sky knows its seasons, and the turtle dove swift and crane keep the time of their coming, but my people pay no heed to the law of God.
Yeah. So they don't learn. We haven't learned, and we know better. We should know better. And then Jeremiah says, look, the animals have instincts. They know where they're supposed to go.
Yes, they do.
we don't. And we have not been following our instincts. Our instincts should be to turn back to God. So
how can you say we are wise and we possess the instruction of God? Assuredly, for naught has the pen labored, for naught the scribes. The wise men shall be put to shame, shall be dismayed and caught. See, they reject the word of God, so their wisdom amounts to nothing.
yeah, so the people who should know better, they don't, right? The priests, the scribes, the wise men, all these people, they should know better. Yeah.
Assuredly, I will give their wives to others, and their fields to dispossessors. For from the smallest to the greatest, they are all greedy for gain. Priest and prophet alike, they all act falsely.
Yeah. So yeah, you're going to lose everything. And again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who is doing it, priest and prophet alike. So again, he's holding everybody accountable, and he's saying you're all accountable. You're all equal in what you've been doing. And again, this is what people do. This is what people do, even when they're, maybe especially when things are going to hell.
They offer healing offhand for the wounds of my poor people, saying, all is well, when nothing is well. They are priest and prophet.
Yeah, and actually he says, yeah, I mean, he actually left it off there. He didn't just say the ordinary everyday. I mean, he said from the smallest to the greatest, but he's saying essentially he's leaving it at the greatest, the priests and the prophets. And again, these are the people who should be doing better, who should know better. And again, they say shalom, shalom, but ain't shalom. So shalom, shalom, ain't shalom. Yeah.
They have acted shamefully. They have done abhorrent things, yet they do not feel shame. They cannot be made to blush. Assuredly, they shall fall among the falling. They shall stumble at the time of their doom, said God.
So again, that's kind of says God is, kind of the end of an idea or an end of a prophecy or end of a text. But again, these are people who can't, they should have shame. They don't have shame. They can't blush. It's a great phrase. They have no shame. They can't blush.
I will make an end of them, declares God. No grapes left on the vine, no figs on the fig tree, the leaves all withered. Whatever I have given them is gone. Why are we sitting by? Let us gather into the fortified cities and meet our doom there. For the eternal, our God has doomed us and has made us drink a bitter draught because we sinned against God.
Yeah, so we're gonna get that phrase again: drinking bitter draught, bitter drink, bitter wormwood. Drinking wormwood. He's basically saying we're gonna do this. And again, what he's telling people is it's gonna happen, right? And so it's better off. We're better off heading to the cities now, trying to wait this out and deal with it, because he says it's not gonna change. This is what's gonna happen. It's already been sealed. So this is why he's saying it's better for us to try to wait it out. Nobody wants to hear that. They want to know how they can want to know how they can avoid it, not how they can survive it.
We hoped for good fortune, but no happiness came. For a time of relief, instead there is terror. The snorting of their horses was heard from Dan. At the loud neighing of their steeds, the whole land quaked. They came and devoured the land and what was in it. the towns and those who dwelt in them.
Yeah, so here they're talking, he's talking about the northern part of Israel being attacked and stuff being taken away, right? So this is, we know what happens here. The northern kingdom was already destroyed. We know what happens. This is now our time. Now, when he says we hope for good fortune, right? We hope for peace. That's what your translation has, right, Mary? Yeah, we look for peace, we hope for peace. And no. Now, he's saying this because there are other prophets that are going around going, we're going to survive this, just like we survived the Assyrians, we're going to survive the Babylonians. And he's saying it's not the same situation. This is now unavoidable. We're going to lose, which means it's going to be a huge catastrophe, and we're going to lose. So don't think that we're going to survive this. This is now going to happen to our country. It happened to the northern part of Israel. It happened to our brothers and sisters, our cousins, if you will, in the north. But now it's coming to us now for good.
Lo, I will send serpents against you, adders that cannot be charmed, and they shall bite you, declares God. When in grief I would seek comfort, my heart is sick within me. Is not God in Sion? Is not her sovereign in her midst? Why then did they anger me with their images, with alien futilities? Hark, the outcry of my poor people from the land far and wide. Harvest is past, summer is gone, but we have not been saved.
Yeah, it's a famous line too. So when people look at this and they say, look, he says, you worshiped other gods here in the land. You did not listen to the poor. It's done. And he makes the comparison here. He makes a lot of analogies here. He's saying it's done. The harvest is over. The summer is gone. There's nothing happening now. It's all done. It's already been decided. Well, that's to the fact that there were people who could charm snakes, right? These are not snakes that you can charm. So the destruction it's going to come from the Babylonians is not something that you can stop. You can't talk your way out of this, right? This is not going to be a charming situation. It's not charming at all. Yeah, and here's a very famous line.
Because my people is shattered, I am shattered. I am dejected, seized by desolation.
That's what God says, right? It's not, Jeremiah is saying it, but he's saying this.
Is there no balm in Gilead? Can no physician be found? Why has healing not yet come to my poor people?
So there's the line, right? Is there no balm in Gilead? So this is the first time we have this phrase. This is where the phrase comes from. It exists in rabbinic literature. It exists in Christianity. It's referenced many places. This phrase, is there a balm? Is in this case, there's no balm in Gilead. But so what is this balm of Gilead, right? So if you look it up, the balm of Gilead is actually a phrase. If you look it up, it's a phrase for something that will cure you. So a balm of Gilead, here I'll show you, is it's a phrase. Here.
Substance, doesn't it?
Yep. Oh wow. There's a here, I'll show you. There's a lot of references to it. Here's balm of Gilead was a rare perfume mentioned in the Bible, which has come to signify a universal cure in figurative speech. And here's other places. Well, here's the plants that they think it might be. These are plays, Lanford Wilson's. This is a book. There's even a Ricky Lee Jones album. There you go. The Raven has a line, is there balm in Gilead? So what does the King James say, Mary?
Is there no balm in Gilead?
Right? So that's based on the first English translation of this phrase. Is there no balm in Gilead? Right? Is there no balm in Gilead? It was the Tyndale translation. Interestingly, what does your translation say?
Same.
Yeah. So the phrase, the phrase exists. Does anybody have another translation there with them? Interestingly, yeah.
This translation said, is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then has the health of the daughter of my people not been restored?
So that is the translation. What does King James say?
Not the health of the daughter of my people.
Yeah. So the phrase here is bat ami, right? Right. So it is bat, right? So bat ami is translated literally as the daughter of my people. Why then does it use the phrase poor people instead of daughters of my people? The translation here is trying to convey the next level of this, which is the most vulnerable of my people. Now, it doesn't say that literally, but oftentimes that phrase abat is used to say the young girls or women who would be the most vulnerable. So I wouldn't say poor, because poor seems to convey some kind of economic situation. It's more a vulnerability situation. So we have the phrase bat Zion that we have a lot that's translated as maiden Zion or fair Zion. But there is a sense to it, to some extent, of vulnerability, which you don't get as much in the fair Zion or maiden Zion. But there is that sense to it, which is that Israel or Zion or Jerusalem is being compared to a young woman who is vulnerable. It's not just that she's pretty or beautiful. There is a sense that she's at risk, that she can be easily taken away in this situation. So, it's an interesting decision to translate it as poor, but I definitely think that there's an issue, and probably because vulnerable is too long of a word, is not very poetic, but there is that sense of it. But it's not like it's clearly chosen for certain understanding, because it doesn't say my people. It says bat ami. It says the daughters of my people, or my people being compared to a bat. Whatever you want to say, it doesn't say ami by itself. But back to the balm part, which is interesting because it's not a great translation, balm in Gilead, from the standpoint that a balm in this case, well, or I guess it depends on what you think it is, because the balm of Gilead actually is, as I kind of showed you, there was an understanding that this was actually this was a specific plant, that this was balsam or some type of oil that was used for medicinal purposes. Here, Jeremiah does seem to be implying that it's not one thing. So it's weird because it's almost become synonymous with that. So, well, I guess one of the questions that people often has is, what is this plant? So some people say it's the balsam. It's the balsam, which was used or was grown and used for medicinal purposes. Some people say it's some kind of myrrh. Interestingly, there is an oil, an unction oil actually, that's used that has, some people kind of think that it was the balm of Gilead. It is used even in the church. I think in your church, even, Reverend Lynn, they use an oil mixture.
We have two kinds of oil. The one oil
Chrism oil. Yeah. I can only tell you that, like, we don't do this anymore. We don't do oils, and we're just not supposed to figure out what these are, because we don't know exactly what they were, and so we don't mess around. But yeah, I mean, this was clearly there was a medicinal property to this. Okay, there's no question. Why? Because it's paralleled with, can no physician be found, right? A rofeh. That's not a prophet. That's not a healer. I mean, a priest. It's a healer. It's a doctor. It's a person who brings healing. Okay, so this is definitely a medicinal use for this. I don't think people really know what this plant is. And interestingly, though, it's become like, people say, well, this is a really important, this is an important thing to try to figure out what it is. I will tell you that it clearly is meant as a poetic turn of phrase, which is here, I'll just show you real quick. This is what, something like that, but it's for medical right here. It's right here. It says Tyndale's language in the King James. The tree or shrub producing the balm is commonly identified as Commiphora gileadensis, which is literally from Gilead, right? So this is maybe what it is. So they think that maybe it was, some people think it maybe is from a terebinth, which is kind of oak tree. This kind of tree, which is from smaller tree. This is this one. For people.
Which I never heard of. STYRA.
Yeah. So that's this is so this is the, oh no, that's the stacte. This is so this is one possibility, that it is this that's this kind of, hold it a second, is this one. It's also again maybe pistachio. Balsam is designated as maybe what this is, which is let me just see. I think this is the same thing. Yeah, this is the same shrub. Again, what's interesting about it is the Romans wrote about this. So it's not just that the Jews wrote about it. The Romans wrote about it. Tacitus wrote about it. Strabo Josephus wrote about it. This was very valuable if it's the balsam tree. Now, the word that's used here in the text is this word, sari. It's not bosem, which is a word that we also have, or nataf. But it is here, this word sori. Interestingly, the word bosem in Hebrew, besem or bosem, is where the word balsam comes from. If you look it up, balsam is actually based on the Hebrew word. But we're not exactly sure, but if it's from this plant, one of these plants, this was worth a lot of money. This was considered to be it was used. I started, I started reading about this a while ago, but you can see here, right here. Here's the.
Is that the same tree that balsam wood that you can get this
Yeah.
wood?
Yeah. Yep. This is so here, yeah, here's the spices that are used there. So it's, look, we don't know exactly, this is a glass vessel that had some of those kind of oil mixed. We don't know what for sure what it was. I mean, you can start thinking about it, but it's not really the point. The point is that we don't have it. We don't have this healing property for our people. And that's why it's like, people get, what is this Can we get some medicinal properties from this stuff today? That's not the point. He's saying we don't have it. We don't have whatever it is, we don't have it. And this last line of the text,
Oh, that my head were water, my eyes a fount of tears. Then would I weep day and night for the slain of my poor people.
and so it's not coming. There's no help coming. There's no answer to this. And he says, I wish I could keep crying. I wish I could cry. I'm out of tears. I would cry. And again, the same phrase is used. It's not a great translation. It's bada me, right? It's bada me. It's my poor people. It's my daughters and my people, or whatever you want to translate it as, right? Shouldn't be poor people. No, he's saying literally, I can't cry anymore. I'm out of tears. I wish I could continue to cry. I wish my head was full of water. I wish I could, I can't cry anymore. I'm out of tears. I wish God would make it so that I could cry. I can't cry anymore. I'm cried out. My tears are gone because I've been crying, but I can't cry anymore. It's just unbelievable, that phrase, because again, everyone focuses on the balm in Gilead, where they don't understand like the full context of this is so powerful, which is there's nothing I can do. The people have, I can't do anything about it. And he's not happy about it. It's not like, go and see, I told you. That's where people kind of they think Jeremiah is like, I told you. No, he's not. He's really upset about it. He says, I wish I could keep crying. So, again, this might not be the end of the chapter. I mean, this is the end of the chapter, but it's probably not the end of the idea. This idea is continuing on. You'll see. Let's keep going.
Oh, to be in the desert at an encampment for wayfarers. Oh, to leave my people, to go away from them, for they are all adulterers, a band of rogues. They bend their tongues like bows. They are valorous in the land for treachery, not for honesty. They advance from evil to evil, and they do not heed me, declares God.
Yeah. And so again, that's not a great translation. They're valorous in the land for treachery. So again, they're good at being treacherous. They're good at not being truthful. They're good at being liars. Yeah. And so, yeah, I wish I could be away from them. So again, he wants to cry. He wants to be away from them. All of these are emotions that he's saying. He's surrounded by this. By the way, one of the Anchor Bible that I was reading recently on Jeremiah, he basically says that Jeremiah's prophecies are kind of all rearranged. He doesn't like John Bright, the author of that, who was professor for a long time as well, does not like he doesn't care for the organization of the way the editor put Jeremiah together, reconstructed Jeremiah. He actually, in his translation, puts it in a way that he kind of thinks it should be. But it's the way we have it. But you can definitely see that of what he's saying, and I'll point out a really blatant part here. But again, this is some of his, this is where Jeremiah is right now.
They all cheat each other. They will not speak truth. They've trained their tongues to speak falsely. They wear themselves out working iniquity. You dwell in the midst of deceit. In their deceit, they refuse to heed me, declares God.
Yeah. Does anyone have a different translation for verse 4? They wear themselves out working iniquity. Somebody have something different from there? Yeah. For they have trained their tongues to speak falsely.
Let everyone be aware of his neighbor and put no trust in any brother.
No.
That's four for me.
Okay, so the next verse is they all cheat each other. What's that?
They committed iniquity and are too weary to repent.
What about yours, Mary? I don't think that's the same verse. Well, here's the literal Hebrew. They have taught their tongues, and that's why it says they have trained their tongues to speak falsely, which is, again,
Taught their tongues to speak lies.
yeah. And what's the last part that they have?
They commit iniquity and are too weary to repent.
Okay. Yeah, the translation here is a little bit more poetic or more emphatic to some extent, but it's yeah, I mean there's no room for repentance. Yeah. And here's what he says.
You dwell in the midst of deceit. I didn't read that.
Yeah.
In their deceit, they refuse to heed me, declares God.
Yeah. Not exactly, again, where you want to be.
Assuredly, thus said God of hosts, lo, I shall smelt and assay them. For what else can I do because of my poor people? Their tongue is a sharpened arrow. They use their mouths to deceive. They speak to their fellows in friendship, but lay an ambush for them in their hearts. I like that. Shall I not punish them for such deeds, says God? Shall I not bring retribution on such a nation as this?
So what were you saying, Don?
Say usually when you're assessing the value of something that's being melted in.
Yeah. So he's saying that I'm going to destroy them. I'm going to melt them down, and we'll be left with whatever's left. Whatever's left, that's what we'll value. Will be a value. It's that idea of going through the process of being purged and having the other parts be melted away, which it's painful for people, because they're people, they're not metal. But again, this is what that's what they're going to be. This is what it's unavoidable now. Yep.
I think you skipped some.
No, you did this part.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. For the mountains, I take up weeping and wailing. For the pastures in the wilderness, a dirge. They are laid waste. Nobody passes through, and no sound of cattle is heard. Birds of the sky and beasts as well have fled and are gone.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful idea, which is, I'm sad for the mountains and for the fields, which are now going to be gone.
Useless.
Yeah, you got a different section? So the chapters and verses, the verses are off, right? So I'm not sure how it goes off like this on the translations that we have on the Hebrew translation. I don't know where, why it doesn't follow King James, but it might be following. And again, because we didn't put the verses in ourselves anyways, there is some version of this, Septuagint or another version of this, which doesn't fall. And actually, maybe the ones you have follows the Septuagint ordering of this, but it is a slightly different, slightly different ordering, obviously, that you guys have. But it is nothing's missing. There's no parts of this that aren't here. It's just a question of where the numbers fall. But again, look at the natural world. You know, the natural world is, you know, it's going to be affected too, but you know, everything's gone. The life is gone. Well, not quite.
I will turn Jerusalem into rubble, into dens for jackals, and I will make the towns of Judah a desolation without inhabitants.
So there will be jackals. There'll be jackals left, but nobody wants to be there. The jackals.
Is anybody so wise as to understand this? To whom has God's mouth spoken so that it can be related? Why is the land in ruins, laid waste like a wilderness, with none passing through? God replied, because they forsook the teaching I had set before them. They did not obey me, and they did not follow it, but followed their own willful heart and followed their Baalim, as their ancestors had taught them.
So God says, people are gonna say, why? Why did it happen? Because they gave up the Torah, which is why they use a capital T there, because it could be the teaching, or it could be the word right here, the Torah that I set before them. So they had it. I gave them the Torah. They did not obey it. They did not follow it. Instead, they followed the Baals. They followed their own willful hearts. They did what they wanted to do. So they did what they wanted to do, and they followed their gods. And even more so, that was taught to them by their ancestors. Their fathers and mothers taught it to them, right? So they didn't just invent it. They were taught this. So what they were actually taught was not my teaching, but how to worship Baals. So it doesn't just say they just did whatever they wanted. Yeah, they did that. But they also did what they were taught, which was to worship these Baals.
Assuredly, thus said God of hosts, the God of Israel, I am going to feed that people wormwood and make them drink a bitter draught. I will scatter them among nations that they and their ancestors never knew, and I will dispatch the sword after them until I have consumed them.
And there's that phrase again. I will make them drink a bitter draught. And they're going to eat wormwood. So this is what they're going to do. This is what they're going to have. And they're going to be exiled.
Connection to the bitterness of the parsley and Passover.
Interestingly, I'm going to look at this, the actual Hebrew here. Well, the word that's used here, let's just see.
Oops.
Let's just see if the word, interestingly, Rashi says he compares it to, did not see that. I don't know that that's exactly what's said here, but he says wormwood is bitter grass, and he says poisonous water is snake venom. I mean, he essentially he says that's what it is. I don't see that here. I mean, it's not what I would say is the most obvious. Let me just see. This is a Barbanel. There's only 2 commentaries on here. No, they don't compare it to that, to any of the Passover foods. Let me see.
Bitter just sort of grounds.
Yeah, but you know what's interesting is I don't know that that's even, the word bitter isn't even what's used here. No, I mean it's interesting because what's your translation have, Mary, for a bitter draught? Yeah, it's interesting. So the word in Hebrew is may rosh, which literally means waters. May is mayim, and rosh usually are the first waters. So what they're talking about here is the stuff that you get when you first brew something that is undrinkable. So interestingly, the phrase that he's actually using is the stuff that you get when you first kind of distill something. You can't drink. You have to run it through and then distill it again. So it's like, that's why they translate it, the King James has gall, because it's not stuff you want to drink. But that's literally what it means. It doesn't even use the word bitter in it. So I'm not wild about, and again, the commentaries really don't give us any other.
Yeah, it doesn't say snake venom. Didn't I see that under?
Yeah, that's what Rashi said. I don't get that either. It's
Well,
really
May Roche from head,
from the
Roche.
head, waters from the head. Well,
Yeah.
maybe that's where he got it from the head of the snake. I didn't think about that, but I don't know. It's not, I've never heard snake venom be called the waters of the head, but it literally what it means is it's the stuff that comes out first out of a distillery or out of when you look at the stuff when it settles, the stuff that's on the top, which is not good. You can mix it up, you shake it up, and then it's not so bad. But no, it's either stuff that they take off and they throw it away, or they mix it back up and it doesn't taste as bad. But yeah, I mean, this is not good stuff that they're going to have to eat. This is what God's giving them, and that's what they're going to be left with. But more importantly, again, they're going to be killed. I mean, they're going to be destroyed by the sword, right? Did you read this part? Scatter them among the nations, right?
Yes, until I've consumed them. Yes.
So here is an interesting phrase here too, which get a lot of analogies, a lot of beautiful language from Jeremiah. And by the way, some of it, like that one there, even back to me, what's interesting about that phrase is it's actually about something that he knew about, which is the waters. Like, we don't think about it. We open up a jug of whatever, orange juice or whatever, and it's just already made. I mean, if you have to make or wait, or you've got wine that's fermenting in your basement, sometimes it doesn't taste good yet. We don't, like, that doesn't happen to us. Our food is always ready and it's always the way it's supposed to be, usually, unless it's gone bad, in which case, it can happen, but it's not supposed to happen. But, he talks about the stuff that people encountered. You'll see the metaphors all the time where he'll talk about the natural world. He'll talk about food. He'll talk about gold or silver. He'll talk about clothing. He'll talk about things, and you actually get to kind of feel the world around him as he does this. He does this right now when it comes specifically to death. Look at what happens here.
Thus said God of hosts, listen, summon the dirge singers, let them come. Send for the skilled women, let them come. Let them quickly start a wailing for us, that our eyes may run with tears, our pupils flow with water.
Mm-hmm.
Easily.
Look, by the way, do you have pupils flow with water? Is that your translation?
That our eyes may run down and our eyelids gush with water.
Yeah, is that what you have too? That's what it is. It's eyelids. I don't know why they use pupils. They wanted to use, again, I'm not going to pick at it, but there's two words here, einaim, which are eyes, and aphafai, which are your eyelids. So I don't know why they use pupils. I'm not really sure. They just wanted to use another parallel for eyes, but they're basically saying you're going to be crying. And it's that.
The dirge singers is wonderful.
Yep. And that's what I want you to see right here. So it's dirge singers and skilled women, right? So this is the people, and you can see women. It's a synonym. It's a biblical doublet. It's a biblical poetry style. It's using the same phrase, right? To let them come, right? Let these women come forward. These are the women that would cry at funerals. The professional wailers that would come to a funeral and cry at the funeral. And they would cry out. Ululate. They would, but they're both. They're actually the wailers. Yeah, they're the wailers, and they're also women who would sing at funerals, sad songs as well. So he's saying, bring these people out. Let's start mourning. It's the time to start mourning is on us. So it's a very powerful phrase. It's really graphic and very visual, and also, I guess, to some extent, it's very oral too. You're going to hear those sounds. Like, we don't have those sounds anymore. Like, people don't do that at funerals. Like, if someone started crying, you'd get uncomfortable. You'd start to, like, why is this person so emotional? Yes.
But
But
isn't the word chachamot, right?
yeah,
Is that the same root, or am I misspelling?
no, that's the same root. That's wise, right? I don't think anyone has a translation for wise. Do you have wise, or does it say skilled? What does it say for chacham? Yeah, skilled, cunning. Yeah, so Mary, the King James has chacham more as a sense of cunning or whatever. It's definitely, I don't love the cunning. I think that's where they probably, it's wise. It's people who know how to do this. So it was seen as a sign of skill or wisdom in order to do this. I actually like skilled, the better one here, which is again, chacham had the root of it is wise, right? Somebody who's wise. But these are women, and it is clearly women, by the way. It's wise women. This is not wise people. It's not chachamim. It's chachamot. 100% wise women. They probably were called wise women because they knew what to do at a funeral. They knew what to do. And they knew that this is what you're supposed to do and when you're supposed to do it at a funeral. It was considered a skill. So they're not saying it because they're just smart people. They know how to do what they're supposed to do here, which is be singing these dirges. So again, we don't have that image, but this was people screaming and crying at a funeral, and they knew what to do because everyone knew that those were the sounds that you had at a funeral. We don't have those sounds. I mean,
we
think
see
about it.
pictures. We see pictures on the Egyptian tombs of women wailing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And we had the same thing, and they still do it in the Middle East. They do it in the Middle East. They have women who walk behind the coffin or the body. It's oftentimes not even in a coffin, and they'll be crying. They'll
Do
be
they pay
screaming.
some? They used to pay some women to have do this
Yep.
job. Yeah.
Yep. So this was a paid job. Now, what's interesting, real crying, but what's interesting about this is that he's telling them, let's get it going. We got to start it. It's the time. We're going to do it. And he's saying it's not that they cry and that's it, that we cry. They make us cry. They bring that emotion out, and they have us cry. So they're screaming, they're crying, they're singing makes us cry. And he says, let our eyes run with tears, right? Let our pupils, or let our eyelids, whatever you want to say, let them be wet, right? Let them be like flowing with water. So he's talked about tears a lot. I can't cry anymore. Here he's saying, let us all cry. He's using those words. And here's
This is such beautiful poetry.
yeah, and that's why it's so powerful. And we want to point out again the language sometimes, because the language in Hebrew, it's tough. We read the translation. I made this point a couple of weeks ago. It's tough to read it in translation, but that's why I want to point out when the words are there, how powerful they are. And sometimes again, we just can't get it. We can't get that level of how beautiful this language is. Again, the fact that these women were called hachamot, they were called wise women. I mean, that's something to think about. It's something that, like, it's there in the text. So if the translation doesn't convey it because they're trying to convey the poetry of it, or the rhythm of it, they're trying to convey the meaning of it. I get all that, but that's also there. All right.
For the sound of wailing is heard from Zion. How we are despoiled, how greatly we are shamed. How we must leave our land, abandon our dwellings. Hear, O women, the word of God. Let your ears receive the divine word, and teach your daughters wailing and one another lamentation.
And that's the word kina, for a lamentation. So he's saying, let's learn these songs. Let's learn these words. And that's what the book of Lamentations is. That's what we call the word in Hebrew is echa, but we call keynote are the lamentations, are songs or prayers that are songs of loss. So a kina is a lamentation. It's not what we call the book of lamentation. The book of lamentation, echa, is really like woe is me, alas, woe. But the word kina in Hebrew is a lamentation. We have too many of them. Too many lamentations.
For death has climbed through our windows, has entered our fortresses, to cut off babes from the streets, young men from the squares. Speak thus, says God. People's carcasses shall lie like dung upon the fields, like sheaves behind their reaper, with none to pick them up.
Pretty rough. Yeah. That's a pretty rough image.
Thus said God, let not the wise glory in their wisdom. Let not the strong glory in their strength. Let not the rich glory in their riches. But only in this should one glory, in being earnestly devoted to me. For I, God, act with kindness, justice, and equity in the world. For in these I delight, declares God.
Right. Now, this little phrase right here doesn't necessarily, this is an example of what Bright says. This doesn't really go with what we just read. I mean, we just read this horrible image of dead bodies piling up in the streets. And then we have, thus says God. I mean, this is good. I mean, this is great, not good. This is great, right? Let not the wise glory in their wisdom, let not the strong glory in their strength, let not the rich glory in their riches, right? Right? But this is beautiful, right? Because God doesn't care about those things, right? Justice and equity. In these I delight. These are what, Now, I will show you something because we have this famous phrase, right? Let's just look at one of the versions of this. You can see this famous line elsewhere in this phrase right here. Well, let's just go real quick. Hold it a second. I don't want that. I want this section. Hold it. Second, some people know what I'm going to put up. Let me just put this up. This is also, you can find this in Sepharia. This we just looked at. Shavuot, famously, Ben Zoma said, who is wise, he who learns from every man, who is mighty, he who subdues his evil inclination, who is rich, one who rejoices in his lot. So you can see Ben Zoma, has a phrase that kind of is a turn on
Who is rich? One who
on
rejoices.
this, right? So here's the text from Jeremiah, right? Let not the wise glory in wisdom, let not the strong glory in strength, not the rich glory in their riches, right? So that's what Jeremiah says. And then Pirkei Avot comes along, Ben Zoma says, this famous line. This is God, not the commentary, but the references, right? Who is wise? The one who learns from everyone, right? Who is mighty? The one who subdues his evil inclination. Who is rich? And who is mighty is the translation of who is strong, right? A gibur, which is oftentimes a hero, right? But who is mighty, right? So here's the phrase, right? So the phrase is actually in Jeremiah of Chacham, Gibor, and Ashir, right here, who is rich, right? So the phrase is beautiful. Originally Jeremiah lays it out by don't think that if you're wise or if you're rich, or strong, or if you're rich, that, it means anything. This is only about, doing kindness, justice, equity. That's what God does. That's the way God behaves. But anyways, Ben Zoma turned it into a beautiful phrase too, which is one that we really love. Right? These are good things to live by, especially this last one. Who is rich? The one who has found happiness in what they have. Right? Now, the last one he adds one right here. Who is honored? The one who honors other people. But that's not in the Jeremiah text. But it's almost as if he said to himself at the end, like, what is really kavod? What is really honor, right? What is honor? So he added one to Jeremiah's list, but Jeremiah's list is pretty powerful too. And it's one that, again, he gets to the point of it's about acting like God, because God does kindness, justice, and equity in the world. And this is what I care about. So let's finish up this chapter, which is also now maybe moving into a different idea, but one that we saw before, one that we saw last week, one that was very powerful, and one that is both in the Jewish sources and in the Christian sources. Let's look.
Lo, days are coming, declares God, when I will take note of everyone circumcised in the foreskin, of Egypt, Judah, Edom, the Ammonites, Moab, and all the desert dwellers who have the hair of their temples clipped. For all these nations are uncircumcised, but all the house of Israel are uncircumcised of heart.
Now, it's the way the chapter ends, and it probably is the end of this little idea here, these couple verses. Again, hine yamin, right? Here comes the days, right? I'm going to punish the uncircumcised, right? Right. I'll know who's circumcised and who's not circumcised. He's talked about it before. He talked about being circumcised of the heart. And that's what he said. The Gentiles are not circumcised, and I'll punish them. But the Jews, your hearts are uncircumcised. So your bodies might be circumcised, but your hearts aren't. And that was the phrase that he gave us before, an RL Lev. And again, it's not really just, of course, heart. It's the heart and mind. The word Lev is for the heart and the mind. And what is he saying, of course, here is that you guys don't get it. Your hearts are uncircumcised, and you will not, what was the phrase he used? You will not let me in. And that was the phrase that Jeremiah had used. Your uncircumcised heart prevents me from being a part of your life. So that was the phrase that he gave us, which is used elsewhere in Judaism. And let me just show you some phrases.
The hair of your temples, the side curls.
Yeah, meaning that they're cutting their hair in a way that they're not supposed to. The Bible tells us that we're supposed to let
Cut the corners
of their hair. Yeah. It's again, we're not supposed to shave the sides of our head. So that's why some people grow payas, because they're supposed to let their hair grow. So again, Jeremiah says, I'll punish those who are uncircumcised and yet uncircumcised. That's the version that, again, it doesn't really say that, but if you look at, Reverend Lynn, you have a Christian Bible there with you in front of you. Look at Acts chapter 7, verse 51.
Acts 7.
Yeah. So, actually 7:15 shouldn't be 7. Yeah, it shouldn't be 7. There's no 7:51. If you look at it, if you find 7:51, that'd be pretty cool.
Jacob went down into Egypt, and he died himself and our fathers.
No, that's not it. Maybe it is 7:51.
What did she say? Can you
No,
repeat it?
Acts 7.
Yeah.
uh, What do you, so maybe it is, maybe this is, oh, so there is 50. So it is 51. So, yeah, that's it.
Resist the Holy Spirit. If your fathers did, so you do.
Yeah. So there's the line. Yeah, here it's incorrect.
Say it again.
It's
Yes,
incorrect here. It should be Acts 7:51.
Oh, stiff-necked
Here
people.
it says 7:15. It's incorrect.
Here it is.
You stiff-necked people, uncircumcised in heart and ears, you always resist the Holy Spirit as your fathers did, so do you. So you can see the Acts brings in two phrases that we have in the Bible to describe the Jews. Am Kashay Oref, a stiff-necked people, and uncircumcised in heart and ears. So here it's ears and heart that are uncircumcised. So this is the phrase that we have in Jeremiah. And again, the Christian Bible uses it as well. Now, what's interesting about it is the Christian Bible is also to some extent talking to people who are uncircumcised. So to say not that you're uncircumcised in your body, but that your heart is uncircumcised is a very interesting thing. And the fact that this book that is attributed to Paul, that he would say that is pretty much an indication. I don't care what your body is, do care that your heart is uncircumcised. He doesn't say that well, he says your ears too, but clearly he doesn't want you to cut your ears. He wants you to cut the foreskin of your heart. And that is what the phrase in that was so weird in Jeremiah that we saw, that was again a beautiful phrase. It's a phrase that Jeremiah uses again poetically and very powerful. Let's see, it was in what verse it was in Jeremiah. It was Jeremiah 4:4. I'll just go back real quick here so you can see it. This is where we got it with Jeremiah.
Exercise yourselves to the Lord.
Yeah. Remove the thickening, right? We said the thickening is not a good translation. It's remove the foreskin about your hearts, right? So there it is. It says right here, remove the thickening of your hearts. Now, of course, what is that allow? It opens your heart to God. By removing the foreskin of your heart, you open your heart. So you open your heart. So it's beautiful. It's a beautiful phrase. So what's the connection? That's the foreskin. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about the foreskin leaving somebody circumcised. Having the foreskin removed means you're circumcised. But that's when he's talking about an uncircumcised heart. So where does it come from? It comes from that same phrase. So that is the house of Israel are uncircumcised of heart. They haven't had that happen. So that's where it comes from. So again, talking about the body, talking about what it really means. It's your heart that has to be circumcised. All right. Now, let's read this chapter 2. We'll see how far we get, but we might get to another phrase coming up that you may have known or may have seen before. As we said last week, we saw the phrase that it's in our weddings where it says, they're not going to hear the voice of the bride and groom in Jerusalem. We saw the balm in Gilead. Let's see what else we have here. This is interesting. Again, the word hear or listen, which we also see in ears and listening, but also, of course, in Deuteronomy in the Shema. Here's the word. Okay.
Hear the word that God has spoken to you, O house of Israel. Thus said God, do not learn to go the way of the nations, and do not be dismayed by portents in the sky. Let the nations be dismayed by them.
Yeah, so don't look up at the stars for astronomy in those days. Don't look at those portents in the sky. Let other people get upset with that. Don't worry about that. It's not where it's at.
For the laws of the nations are delusions, for it is the work of a craftsman's hands. He cuts down a tree in the forest with an axe. He adorns it with silver and gold. He fastens it with nails and hammer so that it does not totter.
Yeah, that's the way people make idols, right? This is the way they make idols. But what are these idols?
They are like a scarecrow in a cucumber patch. They cannot speak. They have to be carried, for they cannot walk. Be not afraid of them, for they can do no harm, nor is it in them to do any good.
Yeah, so these idols are nothing. They're scarecrows. It's a great image too. Like they make these beautiful statues. They're nothing but scarecrows. It's a great, great image.
Cucumber patch.
And a cucumber
A
patch.
cucumber patch.
Exactly. Exactly.
O eternal one, there is none like you. You are great, and your name is great in power. Who would not revere you, O sovereign of the nations? For that is your due, since among all the wise of the nations and among all their royalty, there is none like you.
Ein kamocha. Right? We use that phrase a lot in our prayers. Ein kamocha. There is none like God. But why are people doing this?
But they are both dull and foolish.
Well, so interesting. So there's a mean that there's other gods, since again, there is none like you, right? That which means again, are there other gods? They're just not as powerful as you.
They're just not as good.
What's interesting about this though is that he's comparing it to he's comparing it to the things that other people pray to. So it's interesting that he doesn't say that they're God, because he's comparing them to the idols and not comparing to like what they do as gods or as manifestations, or that these idols represent those things. He's also saying that the stars in the heavens don't do anything. So he's talking about two of the biggest problems that the Jews have, is that they're falling into idolatry and they're falling into worshiping stars. Both things. They're doing both things. And he's saying both of them are worthless. Now look, the reality is there a difference between worshiping the idols and the stars and worshiping or recognizing that there's other powers or that there's other gods? It's an interesting phrase because it kind of opens it up. Let's keep that in mind as we.
Also very anthropomorphic, isn't it? The God walks.
Oh yeah, but he's saying our God doesn't. These gods don't do that. They can't. Yeah, our God could. Yeah. It's interesting that what can these things do?
But they are both dull and foolish. Their doctrine is but delusion. It is a piece of wood, silver beaten flat that is brought from Tarshish, and gold from Ufaz, the work of a craftsman in the goldsmith's hands. Their clothing is blue and purple. All of them are the product of skilled workers.
And again, you can see a little bit about what happened in that world. Silver came often from Tarshish. We're not exactly sure if this is Tarshish is in Asia Minor in Turkey, or it's Tarsus, or it's in Spain. It could be modern day Cadiz. Ufaz, again, this is from Africa. These are again telling us that this is where stuff came from in those days and what kind of expensive stuff they had.
But the eternal is truly God, a living God, the everlasting sovereign. At God's wrath, the earth quakes, and nations cannot endure such rage. Thus shall you say to them, let the gods who did not make heaven and earth perish from the earth and from under these heavens. God made the earth by might, establishing the world by wisdom, and with understanding stretched out the skies.
So here he says flat out, these gods did not make the heaven and earth. So he recognizes that God made everything, right? God made all these things. So he's pretty much, again, seems to be making clear that this is God who did all these things, right? God did these things. God made them, stretched them out. He doesn't have other servants. He doesn't have other things working for him. These are all God's things.
When God bellows, there is a rumbling of water in the skies. Vapors rise from the end of the earth. Lightning accompanies the rain, and wind is brought forth from God's treasuries.
Yeah. And again, all these things were things that other gods did, right? And there were gods that just did one of these things, right? Gods that just made the vapors rise, gods that just made lightning come down, gods that just were in charge of the winds. This is all God. So here's what happens.
Every mortal is proved dull without knowledge. Every goldsmith is put to shame because of the idol. For their molten images are a deceit. There is no breath in them. They are delusion, a work of mockery. In their hour of doom, they shall perish. Not like these is the portion of Jacob, the one who formed all things, with Israel as a permanent possession, whose name is God of hosts.
Yeah. So this idea that this is God, that God is in charge, right? And that God is the one who makes all things. So it really does seem that God is saying, I'm in charge. I make all this stuff. You're out there worshiping gods. You're worshiping these things that are not real. And all I can tell you is that for a good 600 or 700 more years, most people had no issue believing that there were gods that did all these things. And Jews continued to say, no, they're just not. These gods don't do anything. Is this, have they reached a point here where where Judaism has said there is no other God, there is nothing else, period, other than God? Again, the argument of when this comes about, does it exist by the time of Jeremiah or second Isaiah? It seems as that's the case. It seems as though other gods are not just that idolatry and polytheism they're both done.
It
At
seems
least-
like you have the idea he's a portable God too.
He's what?
He's portable. He's a portable God. He's not
That he
just
can-
in Israel, but they could
he
take
can
him
go
with,
other
he's
places.
everywhere.
Yeah, well, we haven't seen it so much, but yeah, you're right. It's also a living God, a God that can't be represented in something that isn't alive.
Right.
Now, again, you could make the argument that metal and everything else is made of atoms, and it's not, it's not that it's dead, but it's not alive, right? And so God is part of is the living God, is a God that actually is everything, is life. That's a pretty interesting idea. I mean, I guess today we'd say this is a God of life.
Gather up your bundle from the ground, you who dwell under siege. For thus said God, I will fling away the inhabitants of the land this time. I will harass them so that they shall feel it. Woe unto me for my hurt. My wound is severe. I thought, this is but a sickness, and I must bear it. My tents are ravaged. All my tent cords are broken. My children have gone forth from me and are no more. No one is left to stretch out my tents and hang my tent cloths.
Yeah, and so here you get a real kind of vision of tents. I mean, it's just very graphic. The tent cords are broken, the things that tie down to the ground. There's no one to stretch the tents. I can't hang out the cloths for the tents. So all these things are here in the text. By the way, he just kind of went away from he went into this whole thing about now being thrown out in the tents. Of course, yeah, exactly. There's a metaphor, and the fact is that the people who would live in let's look.
The shepherds are dull and did not seek God. Therefore, they have not prospered, and all their flock is scattered.
And again, those are people who would oftentimes be in the tents, right, or the shepherds. So the people are yeah, it's a metaphor because it's not everyone's living in tents. He knows that, but he's basically saying that ability to be safe is over. I mean, here it says specifically.
Hark, a noise. It is coming, a great commotion out of the north, that the towns of Judah may be made a desolation, a haunt of jackals.
Yeah, we've seen that phrase before too. So it's not tense, right? It's obviously, they're talking about it in a metaphoric sense. The towns, right? The towns are going to be made desolation. That's not tense, it's towns. So they're not talking about people living in tents. They're talking about the fact that, like tents, they're going to be wrecked. There's no way to tie them down. There's no safety. There's no coverage.
I know, O Eternal One, that mortal's road is not theirs to choose, that people as they walk cannot direct their own steps. Chastise me, O Eternal One, but in measure, not in your wrath, lest you reduce me to naught.
Okay, so that's something to think about. That's a pretty heavy duty thing here. Is he talking about himself? Is he talking about everybody else too? Right? A mortal's road is not theirs to choose. Well, kind of goes against our idea that we have free will and that there we have a path that we can choose. Maybe we have a choice of which direction we go, a Robert Frost type of image, but the road is already there, right? So we don't choose to be there. The road is already there. We can choose which direction to go on the road.
In just measure.
Yeah, exactly. So he says, don't hurt me too much, right? Don't let it be too much. I can't take too much. So so there's this kind of, again, this is why John Bright says kind of is like grouped together ideas, and I think he's right, especially in this section 9 and 10, where there just seems to be a bunch of ideas that were reassembled. I'm not even sure that this one is connected to this one, because this phrase by itself is a very powerful phrase. Chastise me, O Eternal, but in measure, not, don't make it too much. That's definitely a line, but this line could have been this line could have been separate too, which is, I know, O Eternal One, that the mortal's word is not theirs to choose, that people as they walk cannot direct their own steps. I mean, it's not even that you choose which path to go on. You don't even choose which direction you're going on. You don't even choose which way you're walking. They walk the way they walk, This phrase, though, which we finish up with, is famous. This is a famous line. Yep.
Pour out your wrath on the nations who have not heeded you, upon the clans that have not invoked your name, for they have devoured Jacob, have devoured and consumed him, and have laid desolate his homesteads.
That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the previous one, because here he's asking, when I get punished, don't make it too much. Now you could say, well, it's connected to this next phrase. Well, it's actually not the same phrase for wrath. It's a different phrase. Here it's yasreni, which is the chastising, and no, this is
The mishpat.
by the way, what's your translation, Mary, for your wrath? It's not wrath, by the way.
The afcha.
No, that's
Well, that's
what?
negative.
That's
Right.
No, what's verse? Pour out your fury. What does yours say? Wrath. Okay. Yeah, that's
Footnote also says that this is a later edition.
what does
The
Shvo Chamacha,
verse.
pour out your wrath, the 25. Yes. So when we get to 25, yes. So so you jumped the gun, but yes. So Reverend, so maybe the connection is wrath, anger, pouring it out. It's not really pouring out. Shvoch is definitely here. It's a different phrase for wrath. Apecha. No, but it's fine. 25. So now, so 24, 25, I'm saying are probably not connected. Reverend Lynn just said that verse 25 probably wasn't even there originally. Yeah. There's a problem. And again, I looked at the commentaries on it. I looked at Bright for the Anchor Bible. What does he say? Well, we got a problem. Well, it's not a problem, but we have to answer it, which is, I will show you on a different window, something that you probably know. When do we say that line, Judith?
Pesach,
Yeah,
Haggadah.
it's in the Haggadah, right? It's the part that we talked about when we talked about Elijah. We opened the door for Elijah. We talked about it a few months ago when we read Elijah, that we're supposed to say those words. We don't say those words anymore. I don't say those words anymore. Most people don't say those words anymore. It's not oftentimes said at a Seder. Shvo chamatcha, pour out your wrath. That's a pretty wild phrase because it's pretty angry, right?
I made a mistake. It's not, I was looking at the wrong thing. It's anger.
Okay, yeah, for the other one.
Yeah.
Yes, it should not be the same word. It's not the same word in Hebrew. But here's what I'm going to tell you. Back to this, pour out your wrath, right? Let's look real quick. I'm going to show you. I'm not going to show you from the Haggadah yet, because I'm going to show you this. This is the book of Psalms. That's Psalm 79, verse 6. That's the phrase, right? Verses 6 and 7. Shvo chamacha. It's the same phrase. Okay? It's the same phrase. So how did it get into Jeremiah? Now here's the issue. And again, most people say, look, the phrase it's the same phrase. So how did it get into Jeremiah? So as Reverend Lynn's commentary says, it's a later addition. There's only two possibilities, as Bright says. Either Psalms quoted Jeremiah, or an author, an editor, popped this in there. Now, it's hard to believe that Psalms totally out of context just quoted Jeremiah. That's why most people don't think that's what happened. They think that somebody took this line from Psalms and popped it into Jeremiah at the end of the chapter. Why here? We don't really know, other than maybe the connection to anger or wrath, and that it kind of ended with that idea, which is one of, don't let your wrath reduce me, and then on top of it, let your wrath be on them. So if you look at the notes in other Bibles, it'll say something like, this is a post-exilic text, the one from Psalms and the one that we have here. Regardless of how it got there, why, when it got there, it's there. And we say it at Passover. And the reason we say it as Passover is that we opened up our doors, we showed our Gentile neighbors that we were not slaughtering Christian children for our matzah. And on top of it, to show them that we were not doing anything wrong, we added a little jab in there, which is, and God, make all these people suffer, which is again, the reason we don't say it anymore is because thankfully we don't live in a world where we're living like this. You could imagine the Jews in the night of Passover 1943 in Warsaw Ghetto saying that phrase and actually really believing it. Jews who live in 2023 California don't feel that way, and so they don't generally say this. They don't even try to recontextualize it. Sometimes they actually add a new phrase that's been added in some Haggadah, which is pour your love out on the Gentiles, especially those who've, taken care of us. So it definitely has changed over the years. But, look, the fact that Gentiles demanded to some extent accountability to make sure that we weren't doing anything in there, the fact that the Jews added a line going, and by the way, God, when you're going out and doing what you do on Passover, which is kill our enemies. Remember how you did it in Egypt? Do it again. And that's what they did. And so this phrase here is used, and it, to some extent, it's almost the exact words of a people that's completely disenfranchised and has no power to ask God to do it.
It's not like First of all, they were, blaming us for doing these things, but we weren't. And, not only that, they're the ones that were doing it. That's why you could go after that.
Yes, and this is why, again, people don't feel as comfortable saying those words. And so we say, pour out your love instead. So this is how some people have changed it. This is in the Haggadah that we use oftentimes. I'll show you the text that we have. This is the,
We use this, the Seder,
well,
sound familiar.
we don't do it. That's why. We've never said it. It's on the page. I mean,
Your love through.
oh no. Well, that's because we don't do the pour out your wrath. Here's the line that's been added to it. So the traditional text is above it. Pour out your fury on those who don't, pour out your wrath in them, right? So then we add, this is the text that's added in the different night Haggadah, the Haggadah that we use. We don't do this part. Pour out your love on the nations and on the kingdoms who call upon your name, for they shown loving kindness to the seed of Jacob, and they defend your people Israel from those who devour them. May they live to see the sukkah of peace spread over your chosen ones and to participate in the joy of your nations. So that is, they defend your people, right? So this is the opposite of they devoured your people, right? And they've saved you from those who would devour them. So that's why that phrase got, this is not the way it looks. This is just the text. This is like, so you can see the text. But yeah, that page on the Haggadah is a version of Jeremiah. See, most people, like, they know it's in Psalms. They don't even talk about the fact that it's in Jeremiah because it's so out of place. It's not so out of place. It's clearly an addition, or it's not really. We're not sure why it's there, but it's there, and so we read it, and it's not like Jeremiah couldn't possibly have said that, but we don't believe that Jeremiah said this, which is why translations usually have something like, this is a later edition, or some kind of note, some kind of footnote on this, because it has to be, you have to acknowledge that it's in Psalms. You have to acknowledge its presence in Psalms. And it's not like a word that's the same, it's the entire line, except in Psalms, it's two verses. But I'm just saying, you can't not point that out. So we pointed out two things. It's in Psalms and it's also in the Haggadah. And that, I guess, the most important thing is we don't say it anymore, or we don't believe it needs to be said anymore.
Is it in Hebrew? Is it in Hebrew in any Haggadot? The pour out your love?
Oh, the
edition?
The different night has it in Hebrew. It says
But they do have it.
yeah. It says shvoch ahavtecha. It says pour out your love. So, I mean, again, they wrote it. I mean, they wrote it 20 years ago when they did the Haggadah at the Hartman Institute. The people who wrote that Haggadah did it. I don't know if they based it on an earlier version of that prayer that somebody else had written in the last 150 years as a nice way of saying it. But again, that's the way the chapter ends. It's probably not, again, was not originally part of Jeremiah. But again, I don't want to dwell on that. It doesn't really matter. It's a really powerful line. But it is, again, asking God to do it. But again, the way Jeremiah, the editor, whoever put it in after a little asking of God, please don't make your wrath too bad on me. Please don't punish me too much. And as I said, I'm not even sure that these lines, all of these lines, I'm talking about this one, this one, this one, this one. I'm not sure that those aren't all. And again, it's not me saying this. Other people who've read this as well are saying that maybe this is a collection of sayings that were kind of assembled rather than being a multiverse prophecy, that these are, or actually lines that were kind of added together. Instead of like, again, an Isaiah prophecy or Jeremiah has prophecies too that are multi-line, multi-verse ones. As a matter of fact, this one coming up that we'll read it next week is one that's a multi-verse one, and it also doesn't have the biblical poetry style, which is why it's not written like this, right? It's not written like with the doublets. It's written as almost prose. See, you can tell when it just goes through line by line like that without having, I'll get to another one like here, where you see, they'll show you where the verses line up as a doublet, right? So this is biblical poetry. When you see 3 words per line, but when you go back to something like this, it's more like prose. Why? Because you can see, the doublet, right? You can see the doublets when they land up. Let us cut him off from the land of living, that his name be remembered no more. You could have used either of those lines. The synonym, the emphasis that comes through having a double line like that, that's biblical poetry. That's why that's why you'll see it like that, if it's in that style. So it's hard to do. Believe me, you need to have a thesaurus nearby as you're going through and trying to write in biblical poetry style. It is an interesting skill. All right, folks, we will see you either tomorrow night for numbers, or we'll see you next week in person. We'll be in person again in the last week before I go to Israel. So please join us next week. I'm not going to Israel by myself, as I said. I'm going to Israel with many people, not necessarily people who are on today, but people who are on other days. I don't see any of our Israel people with us today, but we hope that you have a good rest of the week. And again, join us in person or online next week too. Take care, everybody. Thank you, Judith, so much for leading us and for taking us through Jeremiah today.
My pleasure.
Take care, everybody.
Be safe,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.